Hi everyone, today I'm going to tell you about the anime Infernal Paradise, and you don't forget to put a like and subscribe, and we're going to get started. The main character's name is Gabimaru, nicknamed Empty, and right now he is about to be executed, only the executioner breaks his sword on his neck. Then they tried to burn him, but the fire couldn't kill him either. The thing is, Gabimaru is a professional killer, and his body is not capable of dying like that. On top of that, Gabimaru himself resists execution, even though he keeps telling himself over and over that he wants to die. This, he tells Giri Yamada, the girl who was assigned to take notes. It turns out that his parents were killed by the village headman because they were going to escape from there. He took Gabimaru in to raise him and made him into the perfect shinobi. He also gave him his daughter Yui as a wife, leaving a scar on her beforehand so that she would remember that a woman cannot get happiness in this village. The headman is immortal and has demonstrated this to the people of his village many times. At one point, Gabimaru also decided to run away, but the headman found out about it and sent him on a mission where he was caught and sentenced to death. After futile attempts to execute him, Gabimaru is brought in for one last execution, where Sajiri will now be his executioner. It turns out that she is a weapons checker and executioner. Her entire clan specializes in executions, and so cutting off Gabimaru's head won't be too difficult for her. Even though Gabimaru wanted to die, he now fears for his life and resists the execution. She realized that it's all about his wife Yui, whom he loves dearly, even though he tries to hide it. She has become the meaning of his life, so he wants to return to her and will do anything to do so. But he's been sentenced to death, and his chances of meeting her are rapidly dropping to 0. Suddenly, however, Sajiri pulls out a scroll of pardon, saying that all his sins will be forgiven if Gabimaru performs one task for them. He will need to travel to the Isle of the Dead, where Gabimaru must find the elixir of immortality. And if he obtains this elixir, Gabimaru will be able to see his wife. The problem is that this mission is deadly because everyone who has gone to this island has never returned alive. So Shogun Tokugawa ordered to send desperate suicide bombers to this island, and whoever brings him this elixir will be pardoned. Gabimaru has arranged this, but first he and Sajiri need to escape from his execution site, and to do so he uses his special technique called the Fire Monk. We are then shown how Sajiri learned to execute. Her father was considered the best executioner, so she strived to reach his level. But each execution was difficult for her, and therefore the deaths of the prisoners were painful. The thing is that executioners' blades can reflect a person's essence, and since all she has in her right now is fear and doubt, it's all transmitted by the blade. And she hopes that Gabimaru is the one person she can execute without doubt. All the condemned death row inmates were taken to one place where they were shown what became of the man who was on that island. Some didn't like it, and one of the prisoners was going to refuse, for which he was immediately beheaded. The death row inmates have no right to refuse this assignment, and on top of that, places to that island were limited, which meant they would have to fight amongst themselves for the right to go there. A meat grinder began at this place, and the only one not involved was Gabimaru, who was considered the most dangerous one there. He went up to the higher-ups and said that he didn't want to kill anyone unnecessarily. They didn't like that and made him fight a lot of prisoners, whom he killed with maximum brutality, thus showing why they call him Void Gabimaru. The fighting doesn't stop there, and all of the remaining suicide bombers were sent to the island. In doing so, they were each assigned an executioner who would be obligated to kill their suicide bomber if anything happened. On the island, Sajiri and Gabimaru meet Kaien. He is a criminal who has grown very fond of guns and has become literally obsessed with them. He came to the conclusion that the easiest option to find elixir was to kill everyone on the island so that he could then quietly search for him alone. And he decided to start his slaughter with Gabimaru. But he turned out to be much stronger, so he had no trouble dealing with him. It turns out that Kaien was not the only one who had such a plan, and almost all the prisoners killed each other. For example, there's Rakurodo, who first thing he did when he got to the island was kill his executioner. There was also the one who tried to seduce the executioner, but it only resulted in the death of the criminal. Gabimaru realized that he would never find the elixir at this rate, so he decided to kill Sajiri so that no one would interfere with his search. but in the battle neither Gabimaru nor Sajiri could decide to kill each other. At one point, Gabimaru was already standing with his blade over her face, but memories of Yui made him change his mind and not kill Sajiri, who saw the bright side in him. Absolutely everything on this island is dangerous. A butterfly with a human face bites the hand of a suicide bomber named Gantesusai, and he immediately decides to cut it off. It turned out that these butterflies were the reason people were turning into flowers. At some point, huge monsters, some of which looked like monks, started coming out to all the suicide bombers. Gabimaru dealt with them using his special technique. After that, a female suicide bomber named Yuzuhira, who had as many as to executioners with her, approached them. She was so cunning and charming that she first conducted murderous experiments on one of the suicide bombers and then seduced his executioner, so she is accompanied by two guys at once. Gabimaru approached her for a reason. Yuzuhira, thanks to his torture, has very valuable information about this island, and so she agrees to temporarily cooperate with him. They will help each other as long as it benefits them. We are then shown Tubi and his executioner Tomu, who turns out to be his younger brother. They had a difficult childhood, which caused them both to fall into not the best company. One day they are attacked and Tubi decides to take the hit so that his brother can escape. Toma then infiltrated the Yamada clan, where he was able to gain executioner status in just 1 month to save his older brother. As different in personality as they are, Tiobai and Toma have a great appreciation for each other. Like the others, they want to find the elixir, except they are not doing it for clemency at all, but to become immortal themselves. Sajiri fainted from her wounds during the battle with Gabimaru, causing the team to seek temporary shelter. When Sajiri finally felt better, Gandhi began to demand that she go home. After all, her main job as a woman is to raise healthy offspring, not to fight on this island. She was an executioner and not ready for real battles, but Sajiri wanted to decide for herself what was best for her. After all, everyone around her was condemning her for choosing the path of an executioner, and even her father looked at her judgmentally, trying to convince her to quit. And while they were arguing, they were suddenly attacked by Rakarodo, who fatally wounded Ganda with 1 blow. He then switched to Sajiri, but Gabimaru had already approached them. He hit him very hard, but Rakarodo was unaffected, and Gabimaru immediately realized that he was dealing with a very tough opponent. Gabimaru asked Yuzuhira for help, to which she replied that her job was not to fight, but to give information. Despite his size, Rakarodo is very fast, and if Gabimaru ever makes a mistake and gets hit, it will be bad. Out of his last strength, Ganda says that the blade is the soul of a warrior, and he entrusts his to Sajiri, asking her to execute Rakarodo. Using that sword, she was able to chop off his finger, but that didn't affect him much either. Nevertheless, they were no longer able to injure him in any way. At one point, Rakarodo started crying and then suddenly slammed Gabimaru into the ground, causing him to regain consciousness for quite some time. Sajiri shielded Gabimaru from Rakarodo's blows with her blade to prevent him from being killed and eaten. When Gabimaru came to his senses, he used ninja techniques and set everything on fire. He did this because carbon monoxide always goes upwards, and given that Rakarodo was crying and consequently breathing a lot, he inhaled the gas very quickly and therefore fell to his knees. Sajiri had the perfect opportunity to execute him, and with her blade she gave him a painless death and release from his suffering. After that, they ran after Yuzuhira and Senta, who came across the ruins of a village, which means that once upon a time, ordinary people lived here. Meanwhile, Kyoba and Itoma encountered the Celestials engaged in carnal pleasures. As they interrupted them, they were immediately sentenced to death, and one of the girls, turning into a man, quickly drove them to half-death and threw them into a pit, where they were to turn into flowers and then were to the Serba of death. Meanwhile, Tenzo, along with a criminal named Naruguri, was trying to escape. The thing is that Naruguri lived in a village in the mountains, and their people rejected the government and lived their own culture, and for that is death. Everyone in her village was killed, and she was sentenced to execution. Except Tenzo didn't think you can't be killed for that, and that's why he tried to save her. The problem was that they couldn't leave, because the current was always leading them back to the island. At one point, they stumbled upon the wrecked ship they had come here on, and the monster was beside it. Not without difficulty, but they still escaped back to the island, where they were met by Ruchin, another celestial. Just like the last Celestial, he was going to take them down, and there was nothing Tansy could do about it. Escaping from him is almost impossible, and if you cut off his limbs, they will regrow. They're aided in their battle with him by Cyan, Tansy's mentor. He chops off Chu King's head, buying time for them to escape. Tenzo was once an ordinary homeless kid. His parents couldn't provide for him, and he earned his food by bullying, until at one point after a fight he was met by Cyan, who saw potential in him. Tenzo wasn't easy, but nevertheless Cyan was able to nurture a worthy swordsman. And what was his surprise when the recently selfish kid started talking about wanting to protect and help Noragaya. Suddenly, a Celestial bursts in and instantly wounds Cyan, causing Tansy to have to fight him alone. But understandably, he couldn't defeat him, but by sacrificing himself, he gave Cyan and Noragaya a chance to escape. His death hit them hard, but Cyan swore that he would avenge his apprentice. When Gabimaru came across a village, he also saw a girl there, which Gabimaru and Sajiri ran after while Yuzuhiro and Senta fought the previously unseen creature. The girl was incredibly strong, but Gabimaru still managed to catch her, causing her to start crying. Sajiri calmed her down, and they traveled back together, where Yuzuhiro had already overpowered a tree that suddenly started talking. His name is Hoko, and he asks that they let the girl named Emi go, and in return he will take them to a village. There he got them drunk and fed, and told them exactly where the elixir was. It turns out that the island is divided into 3 parts, and in the center of the island is the elixir. The only problem is the Celestials, who, according to him, are almost impossible to defeat and kill all the people who dare to set foot on the island. While everyone was asleep, Gabimaru decided to go to the Celestials alone to get the elixir and finally see his wife. He got to the gate, obviously made by humans, where he met the same Celestial that killed Tenza. Ruchin thought that as usual, it was easy and quick to overpower the man. Except that Gabimaru turned out to be so strong that the Celestial had to first use a special technique of non-contact combat, and then, when even that didn't work, Ruchin turned into a monster in the shape of a flower. But even in this form, Gabimaru was able to inflict the strongest wound on him. He still had to die from the Celestial's final blow, but he was saved by Emi, who followed him. After the battle, Juchin had aged a lot, and the other Celestials despised him for it because an ordinary person could inflict such wounds on him. After drinking the elixir, he regained his appearance. The main Celestial named Rin said that this time there were fewer people on the island, but they were much more dangerous. And if it suddenly turns out that they are all roughly equal to the village Gabimaru, they will be in big trouble, so they should prepare themselves. After learning that Gabimaru had escaped from them, Sajiri and the others went in search of him, and in the meantime he and Emi had stumbled upon Gantetsusai. Understandably, they immediately began to assess each other as adversaries. Even though Gabimaru was weakened, Gantetsusai realized that if they were to fight, they would both die. Gabimaru realized the same, and since his main goal was to find the elixir, he suggested that they act together. Surprisingly, Gantetsusai agreed, for it turns out that no pardon is of interest to him. He wants immortality, but he wants it to manifest itself in a slightly different way. Gantetsusai will perform such a feat that he will be talked about forever, and thus he wishes to live in the memory of the people. Suddenly, Gabimaru notices that Emi has grown up too fast, even though she was just a child a short time ago. She has also learned to speak, but not well enough to explain how things work. In the meantime, Tubai, as soon as he got out, immediately wanted to fight the Celestials again. During the battle, he noticed that after his limbs were cut off, they grew from the bottom to the top, which meant that somewhere at the level of the navel, or just below, it was their weak point. At that moment, Taoist, a disciple of the Celestials, came to them. They had sent him here to check if the 2 of them had gotten out of the pit, and if so, to force them back in. Since he didn't come alone, Toma would take care of the unconscious monsters, though he would fight this Daos. The assistant of the Celestials began to explain how their power is organized. It is called the Tao and is within every being, but not everyone is able to comprehend it, for it takes years of training and practice. While in the pit, Chiobai somehow crossed paths with the Leons, thanks to which he was immediately able to put that power to good use, and the battle with Daos only helped the reveal as much as possible. Then another Daos came to Gabimaru, and while they were killing monsters, Daos stole Emi from them. He treated her like a mistress, for it turned out that Emi had once been a Celestial like him. but she is different from the other Celestials in that she only has yin energy, which left her with a wound that later caused her to escape. The Celestials have been searching for Emi for many years to bring her back to the temple. The thing is that they are practicing carnal pleasures, and since Emi has only yin energy, they do not see her as an equal to the rest of the Celestials, but only a training device for intercourse. This is why Emi has been in hiding for years. Upon learning of this, Gabimaru and Gontetsusai were greatly angered and understandably wanted to deal with them. There were two Taoists, and their powers lay in controlling beetles, and that's not counting their Tao abilities. At first, they couldn't do anything against them because Gabimaru could sense their attacks, but he couldn't see or dodge them. He was helped by Emi and Fuchi, who explained that it was possible to master the Tao by combining the weak with the strong. After that, he almost immediately possessed the Tao, with the help of which he began to sense and read not only his opponents, but also everything around him. But having recognized the Tao, killing Taoists was quite easy for him. Except that after dealing with him, Gabimaru loses consciousness. At this time, Sajiri and the others were on their way to the gate. Along the way, Senta realizes that everything created on the island is false. The beliefs on the island are created from different religions from different times, and it all looks as absurd as possible. Senta comes to the conclusion that everything happening on the island is part of a plan, and he really wants to unravel it. When they get to the gate, they are met by Muden, who tells them that the religion the villages on the island pray to is a fabrication. They made it up on purpose to make it easier for them to control the locals. Everything the boys know is a lie. Even the elixir that makes them all die is a fabrication. He also says that he senses potential in Yuzuhiri, and when he kills her comrades, he'll take her on. Except he can't kill them that easily. Yuzuhira used her sticky threads technique, which she used to exterminate any poison she drank. She then used a couple more techniques and slashed Muden, though understandably it didn't kill him. He says she uses Tao during these techniques, albeit in a slightly crude way. He didn't see any of them as a serious threat, and that was a mistake. In Sajiri's martial technique, Tao energy is accumulated during a strike, and this was something Muden didn't realize, hence why he was injured. They conclude that all Tao has compatibility, and Sajiri's energy is like a poison to Mudane, using teamwork with great difficulty, but they still created the conditions so that Sajiri could cut Muden down, and this time his body would not recover. At one point, flowers began to grow on Muden's body, and one of them attacked Yuzuhiru, but she was saved by Senta, after which he himself began to turn into flowers. Muden, on the other hand, turned into a monster, and how to fight him in that form Sajiri didn't know. But luckily, Cyan came to their aid. He entered the battle, but no matter how strong Cyan was, he was also badly injured during the battle. He could have died in this fight, but Cyan was willing to sacrifice himself in order to kill the Celestial. Sajiri, Yuzuhiro, and Norugai came to his aid. Their plan was for the girls to distract the monster, while Cyan's job was to get to the monster's bodies and with one blow cut off their weak point, which they thought was the point below the navel. When Cyan finally reaches them and is about to strike, suddenly Senta starts yelling that this monster is a plant, and since it is, its weak point is in the family's rudiments. Believing him, Cyan chops that seed and kills Muden, who before he dies marvels at Cyan's strength and thanks him for his kill. At this cry, Sendo has spent all his strength and has only half an hour to live. At the same time, Cyan was also mortally wounded. Yuzuhira had an ointment that could save them both, but since she needed it herself, she was only willing to save one person. And Yuzuhira felt that it was Shin who needed to be saved. She didn't want Senta to continue to suffer after all this time he had been lying to himself and doing things he hated himself. Yuzuhira was by Senta's side for the last seconds of his life so that death would be a release for him. After everything happens, Yuzuhiro tells Sajiri that everything in Gabimaru's head could be an illusion. In some villages, indoctrination was practiced, meaning that children were indoctrinated that the village headman was an unquestioned authority and it was strictly forbidden to run away from the village. Yuzuhira decided that Gabimaru's wife was also a fabrication, for what good would it do for an old woman to give her daughter to a 16-year-old murderer? Nevertheless, Sajiri and the others decide that they need to move on, and first, they need to find Gabimaru. He finally woke up at this time, by the way, but the Tao's awakening had taken its toll on him. for Gabimaru had lost his memory and he couldn't remember anything that had happened to him here. After all of this, Gabimaru returned to his state of being a ruthless killer. He didn't see Emei and the others as a threat, so he decided to scout things out first. The only one who noticed the change in him was Emei, who felt that Gabimaru was different. And that's where we